This is a continuation of our discussion with Sally Ann Burris regarding restorative change, and we were going to take our conversation a bit further.
We want to find out what happens next.
Yes.
Sally, we've understood about the project that was sabotaged, that is now manualised, that's rolled out, that could be licensed, that could be trained to people. And what I suppose what we need to talk about is what happens next, really, how to make a change to the existing situation. Jill and I have been talking to people about the family court, and that's the area we're most interested in. Public law as well as private law, although mainly we're talking about private law at the moment. And one of the parallels we are seeing with what you've intervened, your intervention with domestic abuse, is a parallel with the alcohol and drug courts that have run pretty successfully in the UK as a copy of an American idea.
But they're only in public law proceedings, so they're only in proceedings where children are the subject of a care order application.
But it still could be relevant
Of
because
course,
the pilots you ran
yeah.
were children who were on the at-risk register and highly relevant. So this might be something which could be rolled out into the public law arena at least, even if private law couldn't fund it or there was no way of
But
making it
in
work.
many ways, some of these high
But
conflict
mediation
cases,
and so on touches on this as well. So there is potential in private law
I
as
would
well.
hope so. Yeah.
Because what I want to kind of ask you about is whether you feel that the process you're describing could be applied for people who are in the courts actually at the time, and where there is a potential for them to either lose their children to adoption or long-term fostering, or there might be some outcome in terms of contact being reduced or limited in the private law situation. Because your families were on a voluntary basis, and this would introduce a degree of pressure,
compulsion,
and forced compliance.
Yeah.
People would perceive it as. Do you think that it could work in that context?
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, when we created it, we were very aware of other environments that this intervention may benefit. We looked at family court, we looked at, even I know this probably sounds kind of away from the whole family and children thing, but one of the things that I was really interested in exploring was asylum seekers and families that came here from violence. Because the behaviours within, I've worked in the communities for a really long time and across many communities, and the situation around violence and integration and issues with teenage children coming from other countries and stuff. So we looked across the board and which services would benefit from that, whether they were legal services, social services, whether they were mental health services, National Health Service and things. So yes is the answer to that. We made sure we were very mindful and consulted throughout the intervention to see where this would fit in. I within private law, because of when families, even where there's no violence in place, where there's been no historical violence in place, when mum and dads or mum, dad and dad are going through separation and their relationship is ending, violence suddenly presents itself in a certain format. And I mean, I kind of get it, it's really sad when a relationship ends and it takes people through a really bad journey for quite some time.
And anger is a recognised part of a bereavement process. So you lose your relationship, and anger is part of that reaction.
Yeah, even if you're a choice, even if you're the one making the choice, because there's lots of sadness in that and there's lots of contention in it. So we even looked at it in terms of, because we've got a lot of families who are traumatized by court processes or going through court processes in terms of separation and parent alienation. I mean, the ACEs now, Adverse Childhood Experiences, which has been, very profoundly integrated in services here in Wales over the last kind of 6 years, really. We know what damage these kinds of experiences do to children. So we looked at it.
Can I say, we also know that sometimes just the legal process ramps up the aggression between couples, because lawyers have to explore every avenue. They can't represent their clients properly unless they point out all the risks and dangers, and that can escalate the amount of hostility in a case. So finding another way which reduces hostility would be very welcome to most families.
I mean, because as you know, I work a lot around like parent alienation, anything that goes through the court process, around supporting families, particularly men and their children, but women as well. I mean, we don't believe that anybody should have that kind of, that those issues. But anything when you're going through that court process, what we know is that there are people that experience kind of violence that they've never had before, and that can be quite. I mean, the court process, it creates legal services will ask parents questions. They will say things like, have you ever experienced domestic abuse? And the reason for that is because when somebody has been known to experience domestic abuse, there is funding available for the ones that are the victim. So we know court processes, unfortunately, there's lots of false allegations and lots of stuff going on.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things we know is that court processes for lots of people is a lot of money. It earns some people a lot of money. I mean, I've been coaching some dads, because we've got dads with like I've got one dad at the moment. His bill so far is £130,000, and
Wow.
he's been going through this process for 6 months. So I've been working with him strategically to be able to help him through that process, to try and minimize the issues with his family and the income, the money. So what we know is, though, this intervention works very well there, because what it does is it assists a family to downtime their relationship in a really effective way. So, I mean, the output is, to separate amicably or to stay together violence free. So, all of the families that we were working with were going through the court process. Social services impacted that court process on them, because, as you know, when a child is on a child protection register and there's violence in that family, then social services put pressure on that family to separate. I mean, that is the truth of it. That's the honesty of it. So this intervention works very well through those court processes. It works as an arbitrary. It works with peripheral services, and it's designed really to minimise the harm on the families.
Well, a lot of services simply wouldn't get involved with families when they were in the court process. I mean, certainly CAMS services have very often simply refused to be involved until the court process is over, which of course is hopeless if you're in difficulties and you actually need help.
I mean, me and CAMS, we're not the best of friends. We're not the best of friends on how quickly they put interventions in place. We're not best of friends. I know this is about resources and services and stuff like that, but unfortunately CAMS, they're a very distant service, and that's the only way I can describe them. They're a very distant
But the reluctance
service
to get involved with families who are in court has often been explained on a kind of therapeutic basis. That is, that you're not dealing with the real person at that time because they're under the influence of the court process. So what you see is a kind of fake version of their problems. In other words, they're not saying it's about we're overwhelmed or we haven't got the money. They're saying it's not good therapeutically, which I don't think is true. I mean, you're simply not helping people if you refuse to get involved until after the problem's over. In a way, that
was what I was experiencing with CAMS when I was working in public law cases. They would not engage with the children until the public law proceedings had ended,
which is not helpful.
There is a direct relationship between that statement and their duty of care. And as you know, when a family are going through this is traumatizing in itself. When you've got a family or young people, children, who are already having existing issues or presenting issues that most definitely need that duty of care, then that argument doesn't stand up.
No,
and it should never stand up.
And I've no doubt that the courts want to see something change. I don't think it's rewarding for the judiciary to sit there simply looking at hopeless situations and being told it's hopeless.
It's thoroughly depressing.
And of course, the interventions that are offered, for example, the DAPs, seem to be totally ineffectual, probably harmful, if anything, because of the false hopes that are raised. And the cost that's being spent on something useless. So I'm sure there's a hunger for an intervention which would actually remove families from the court and from the kind of antagonistic legal process.
And also what sorry, Sally, what I love about what you've done is it includes whole families and even people who aren't really part of a family, but they've been around forever, you know.
Yeah.
And we've been talking to somebody recently who we'll be speaking to in an interview, who's got her grandparents association, really. And she was telling us that people were spending grandparents were spending the whole of their savings, remortgaging their properties to spend on legal fees to try and get to see their grandchildren.
I know. I mean, that's why the intervention was created the way it was the way it was done.
Yeah.
So, for example, we looked at elderly harm. So we looked at relationships. Basically, I mean, this intervention can be given to a platform where there is conflict. So wherever there's conflict, it's all about relationships. So, for example, if you've got a foster parent who is now working with two sets of children and there's conflict within that family, it is designed to work within a complex setting. As human beings, we build up these responses, these behavioural responses, and when you're trying to put two separate groups or two separate families together, or you're trying to separate the families amicably, that the conflict and the behaviour that comes out of that is very similar. So the intervention was designed, and we were extremely mindful of the fact that this is about relationships and how relationships work together and how they kind of built. So the family plan was designed so that everybody continued to have their voice. I mean, our intervention, what happened with it is an output. As you will know, that when a child protection process is put in place, anybody that's involved in that family and the family themselves there's this meeting system where people are drawn within that. Now, the normal format is that the family don't have a say in what happens to them. Services or interventions are done to them. That's the method that's done. Now, when we worked on the family plan and we kind of brought that to the family and said, right, this is what this means, and this was what is going to happen through the intervention, and this is the end. This will be part of the end for that. When they were creating that family plan, they were very aware that that family plan would also be part of their child protection. Okay, so the family and the children, right? The children were involved in this as well. Okay, so they had their section in the family plan. They created this plan. So as the social services child protection was, moving forward parallel to what we were doing, the children and the parents were taking this intervention into the child protection meetings, and they were using the family plan to then help decision making within that. Now, one of the things that always happens is, if you're a support worker, one of my staff, and you're supporting the family through child protection, you will be part of that. And then, because my support obviously are with the family every week, a lot of these interventions, they may see these people once a month or once every 6 weeks. So families are kind of isolated, and they, other services, social workers even, are dipping in once a month, once every 6 weeks, don't even have a clue what's going on. But my team did, because we were there every week. So you're in there, education's in there. And normally it's a group of professionals deciding what's been going on in this family and what's going to happen in this family.
I've sat in dozens of case conferences where you just listen to everyone but the family's perspective.
Exactly. But with the family plan, and because it was a pilot, the family were delivering their interventions. They were saying, this is what's happened, this is what we all think, and this is what we want to do on the next step forward. And they were in control of their family plan. So, and the services wrapped around there, they were, one of the lead social worker and chair came up to us with our families and said, I have never ever been involved in a child protection meeting where the family are steering what happens and how they are going to move forward with their life. And everybody was blown away by it.
Yeah.
I mean, we had amazing feedback from these professionals.
The model in the alcohol and drug courts is that there's a designated judge who oversees the process for that family, and would review progress in the therapeutic side of the drug and alcohol services that's tasked with working with the family. But the drug and alcohol service has to report back if the family are dropping away, or if the individuals with the issues are not attending, or are failing drug and alcohol testing, or not complying in some way. So there would be a responsibility on the people delivering the service to report back to the court with a view about whether the family were still on track to succeed or not. And that would be a challenge, wouldn't it, for people in a therapeutic role?
It would, but when we designed it, because two of the groups that were part of, two of the professional organisations that were part of creating this were already in a process. They'd already been delivering group interventions as an intervention for the court system.
Right.
So instead of somebody going into custodial sentence, they were going into their services. So when we designed it, we designed it with the premise that there may be a situation where a family had been referred to us with this in as part of their life. So there's reporting mechanisms with the assessment processes that enabled that to be integrated within whatever the family was experiencing. You know, often we've got perpetrators who are on license, or we've got perpetrators are literally going through a court process where they potentially could go into prison.
Yeah.
So having an intervention that was working alongside it and being able to offer this intervention to the court, we already designed it to be able to do that because
You've
we
thought of
understood.
everything, Sally.
It sounds very promising.
We did. We already thought of it because like I said,
Yeah.
one of the groups had been delivering an intervention that was an alternative to custodial sentencing. So when we created it, as you know, these services that do their job well will have a complete streamlined management system within it and a communication management system that is effective. So we already know the implications of this service and how it would work with courts and how it potentially could become an alternative to custodial sentencing for perpetrators who were violent and women who were refusing to leave, or men that were refusing to leave that violence.
So the next thing, Sally, is if the UK is determined not to cooperate with an effective intervention, which might relieve,
is cheaper as well.
Cheaper, but might also relieve pressure on the family court and might have a better outcome for families. And we could go on about the list of, if the UK is not going to do that, and I know you're looking abroad to set up panels or committees in other countries where you find the same issues are occurring.
Maybe there will be more enlightened people elsewhere.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, when I went to the Assembly members and I had meetings with them, I gave them research that showed why this intervention worked. I also researched which legislation and guidance within the UK fitted into this. So, for example, future generations, family court law, education. So I gave them a list of 15 legislation that and guidance and even the stuff that they were planning in the future where this intervention fitted in within all of that. So I presented it to them, and my thing was saying, like, I wanted to do this in Wales first. It was created in Wales first, and then I kind of took that flag to them as well. But I mean, this is kind of the hard thing that you face here is that a large number of these said to me, Sally, if I went out into the world with this kind of stuff and I promoted that this was a non-gendered thing, my career would be annihilated. I would be absolutely bombarded.
So we're back to fear again.
We're back to fear. So I know there are cracks now coming. There are cracks in the system where we've got a number of local authorities that are demanding funding back from female or gendered services and things like that. So we know that the system is shifting and changing. There are a number of countries that are looking at domestic abuse services: New Zealand, Australia, America, Canada, and some European countries. So I'm obviously networking across the world now, and the intention is, I mean, Lorna and I got to a point and we thought, we can't let this go. You know, when something is so good and you think it's criminal to drop this, but when you haven't got funding, it's very difficult to kind of give this the space that you need. But both of us agreed we can't do that. We just can't do that. So I'm actually about to start some fundraising, and my intention is to attempt to fund this and to run a full-on pilot. So I've got an organisation called Split the Difference, which is a raising awareness for men and boys and some inequalities. Well, there's more than some, but I run another organisation called Split the Difference. So Split the Difference has got a funding. It's got a funding plan over the next sort of 6 to 12 months.
Right.
I'm working in partnership with somebody who tells me that he's going to raise me lots of money to be able to kind of do some really cool projects and also to fund other people doing projects.
Right.
So one of the plan is I'm really, really hopeful that he comes up with what he believes he can. And one of the projects that I will be doing is we will be putting restorative change into practice, and I've already connected with 2 universities who are willing to evaluate it. So we'll put it through a full evaluation, and we want to get a peer review. So we're desperately trying to raise funds to be able to do that, because that then will set it into the realms of us being able to access funding that comes down, whether it's through tendering or grant funding.
Sure.
So that's where we're at, and I'm really hopeful that we can find somebody who wants to see this work, or lots of people who are thinking, I think that's really cool, and I want to be involved in that, I want to watch how this goes, because it isn't a huge amount of money. The review and the evaluation adds a layer to the costings for it, but it's not a massive amount of money to run a pilot.
No.
So I'm very hopeful.
Okay, and what we'd like you to do is we'd like you to keep in touch with us, and we'll have a periodic update about how it's going, because I think people would love to know what happens next and how you get on.
Well, we'll come on tour with you in Australia and New Zealand.
Yes, please. Yes, please. And if anybody's interested, just get in touch. Say hello.
We will. We'll encourage that.
That's what
Thank
we'll
you
do.
very much, Sally.
Thank you, Sally.
Okay, you're welcome. Thank you so much for inviting me.